Kia ora tātou and welcome to our Education Hub webinar for this evening. My name is Vicky Hargraves and I'm here introducing us tonight. The Education Hub is a non-profit organisation aimed at bridging the gap between research and practice for teachers. And so thank you for joining us this evening. If you haven't already done so, do have a look on our website. We've got a huge online library full of free resources all about the research that's out there about how best we can be doing things for our tamariki. And hopefully it's all really accessible and practical advice, so do check it out. Tonight's webinar will run for about 50 minutes and we'll be opening up partway through the webinar tonight. We'll be opening up to questions. So if you spot the chat button at the bottom, either be at the bottom or the top of your screen, if you open that, when you think of questions, please type them in and I'll do my best to relay them to our experts tonight. We're also recording tonight's webinar and that will be available on our website in the next couple of days. Okay, so tonight we're here to talk about courage and curiosity. We're talking about building a culture of collaborative research and inquiry in early childhood settings. And I'd love to introduce our speakers. I'm really excited to hear from these ladies tonight. We have Bridget Tao, who's with us. She has over 25 years experience across a variety of early childhood settings, including play centre, kindergarten, Montessori, and she's also been an expressive arts specialist working with early childhood settings. She's joined Kids Domain, which is a hospital-based centre in the middle of Auckland in 2009 as the pedagogical leader, and she helped to develop the inquiry-based learning approach that we're going to be learning about tonight. She's also completed a master's in post-human new materialism and particularly the active roles that material has in early childhood settings. And she's co-authored a book, so if you haven't seen it already, Cup, it's called A Vibrant Vessel of Learning and Creativity, so worth checking out. And joining her is Shirlene Murphy, her colleague at Kids Domain. Shirlene's the education manager, which involves facilitating and supporting the professional learning and development of the teachers in the centre and the leaders. And she has a particular emphasis on strengthening their knowledge and skills and professional development. She's also got an interest in mentoring, te reo and tikanga Māori, and exploring everyday leadership. So thank you so much for joining us, Bridget and Shirlene.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Okay, well, let's get started. My first question is, what do you mean when you talk about a culture of inquiry in your centre? Bridget, would you like to lead?
Sure. Well, look, I'd like to start first off by acknowledging, before I get underway, the kaiako and the tamariki and the whānau parents and our wider community of Kids Domain, past and present. It's a huge honour for both Shirlene and I to be here and speaking on their behalf about their experience and their learning. And we think that it's really important that we're doing this because to us we highly value the exchange of our thinking and our experiences with other teachers. We know that we certainly get a lot when we enter exchanges like that. And also, before we start I'd like to acknowledge some of the philosophies and the thinking that have influenced the development of our culture of inquiry, including importantly Te Māori and the Reggio Emilia approach, critical theories, and of course Te Whāriki. So to say what inquiry means to us at Kids Domain, we see it as an interrelational living process that generates new meaning and new understanding about ourselves, about each other, and the world of which we're a part. We see it as a natural learning process. I mean, we're really child educators and we see children from the earliest ages being natural researchers. And we strongly believe that, that doesn't stop. As adults, we're learners and researchers too. We're all on a trajectory of lifelong learning and discovery and renewal. And for that, that means to us, we really have a very strong belief in the notion of ako, that as children and as adults, that we are both learners and teachers together. And our inquiry, we believe, is generated from and is produces both the children's learning and ours as teachers as well. So, you know, therefore we can say that our curriculum, both around professional learning and the children's, is co-constructed and co-designed in a really authentic and contextual way. For us, inquiry happens every day, and it happens spontaneously, but it also happens in a very intentional way with sustained investigations over a period of time. We inquire individually, we inquire as groups, and we inquire as a community, as an organisation. So that's inquiry, if you like, in a nutshell, to us.
Totally embedded in every aspect of your day. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Shirlene, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, Bridget's covered it beautifully.
Yeah. Okay, so how did you start developing an inquiry-based approach? Bridget, was this something you wanted to?
Well, basically, it's around a culture of inquiry. We think along with inquiry goes, you know, sort of the intention and the decision to actually create a culture of inquiry. Otherwise, we can get caught up into thinking that inquiry is just sort of like a process that you do, when in actual fact it's very much a mindset, a way of being, if you like. Do you want me to talk to a culture of inquiry, or talk about how we just got underway with our inquiry-based approach first?
Well, up to you, but I think it would be nice to know what you mean a little bit more about a culture of inquiry.
Yeah, well, it's you know, really right from the get-go, we were really trying to focus on developing and nurturing that state of mind, the ability to be kind of like open and curious and experimental and deeply reflective. And that's not easy. That's easy to say, but it's not easy to do. You know, it takes time and the right conditions to really make that shift and to grow that capacity. And to be able to do that, you've got to have support. You've got to have that person right at the beginning, which is how we got started, who was willing to make a really courageous, brave shift, and to build trusting relationships, and to sustain that shift, to ensure that we have freedom and agency and voice, and to be able to act as a community and to feel like we belong to something that's bigger than we are, you know, than we are as individuals. And for us at Kids Domain, that we're deeply rooted in our lived values of whanaungatanga and manaakitanga and ako and whakamana, and they're our touchstones constantly to ensure that we're providing the conditions to really support that culture of inquiry to grow and to be sustainable over a period of time. A culture of inquiry, really to get into that culture of inquiry, really you've got to get to the heart of what your image of kaiako and of tamariki are, and often we learn and are trained to be the knower or the expert, if you like, who feeds information and then assesses that learning against, you know, predetermined outcomes. And before we know it, we're ticking boxes, or we're writing a learning story and then just quickly making links without, you know, really potentially giving it much thought. It's not that we don't care. It's just that we become sort of almost robotic in what we're doing, and it's often it's because we're busy and we're trying to get jobs done and what have you. Whereas, you know, it really takes awareness and courage to step away from that and to go into a new space with a different power dynamic, and to actually see the children as thinkers and you as a thinker, and the children, both of you as researchers together. And it's got to be a space that's really intentional and purposeful. You know, it's a lot of thought and intention goes into inquiry, and you have to move differently in it. You have to, rather than, you know, sort of if you can pre-plan everything out and know where you're heading, it's not like that. You might have a very clear intention of where you want to go, insofar as the values that are underpinning it and the lens that you want to look through. But other than that, you've got to sort of just let things go and follow the path that the inquiry creates itself. And that's quite a different space to step into as teachers, and you need to have a culture, an intentional culture built in around that to support that sort of way of being. And it can be really awkward first taking those steps into that space, and scary, and it can be exhilarating, and it can be frustrating, and it can be absolutely magical and delightful. And it's those moments that keep you coming back for more, and make you happy to navigate through the challenges that are inevitable through that process. And it takes enormous trust in yourself and your colleagues to be able to do that and to go to that place, and in your organisation and your management, in the structures within your organisation to support that as well. You know, you don't inquire alone, it's intensely interrelational, and that's the key premise behind that culture, is the notion of kotahitanga, that everything's interconnected and interdependent. You know, everything is connected: people, places, things, concepts, ideas, time. It's all kind of like an ecosystem, if you like. And at Kids Domain, that's how, you know, we believe our organisation is. It's a living community that's growing and sustaining itself through its own self-directed and self-generated learning and inquiry. It feeds into and enriches our philosophy and our understanding of who we are, and it generates further inquiry from that, and that helps build the culture, if you like, over a period of time. There's a circularity about it. So it's constantly a work in progress, and that culture is what we want to talk around tonight, and to be able to share those insights and those understandings, warts and all, with fellow kaiako who are interested in taking that step, or embedding it further, or you know, or feel like they're doing a really good job with it and they just want other ideas. So yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, perhaps just a question, then, I suppose, about how you get started. It sounds like you know, it's such a big mind shift to make. You know, what were sort of the first steps for Kids Domain? And then maybe I can then come to you, Shirlene, in a moment, and find out kind of, you know, how it's evolved over recent years. But what were the first steps when you want to embed this kind of culture of inquiry and lead that kind of mind shift?
Well, I think this comes back to courage, and you know, it started. I went looking back through, you know, some of our documentation to sort of look, you know, to see how far back things went, and as it went back pre-me, and it seems to have kicked off really about 2005, 2006, and it was a courageous step that Julianne Exton, our director for many years at Kids Domain, took when she wanted to try and steer things away from actually focusing on professional development for teachers with a focus on technical aspects of teaching. She wanted to really be able to encourage the, you know, teachers to be able to really think deeply. And to do this, she engaged Dr. Louise Taylor to come in and to facilitate a 4-year research project, self-funded project at Kids Domain, that was around teachers' collective storytelling. And that engaged the teachers across those years in critical thinking and coming together to share stories about one another. We've got a very diverse community, so we had teachers from all over the world telling stories about themselves and their lives, and we share ideas around practice and what have you. But it was a very powerful experience for us. And then I remember myself, one of my own key learnings was that I learned to go grey, literally as well. But anyway, rather than being black and white, which is what I very much thought I needed to be, you know, you needed to know one way or the other. And to be able to go into this grey zone, which was this provisional place of unknowing, and to be prepared to stay there for a bit, to linger in uncertainty, was a really new thing for me personally. But that was one of the learnings that came out of that. And then after that, once that project had finished, and I regard it as like that stone thrown into a pond with ripples coming out from it, and we're still rippling out from that, from that act. Then after that, Shirlene and I worked very closely together for a couple of years to really carry forward some of that learning forward from that experience and the research into our day-to-day practice at the centre. And we knew in order to do that, we would need to really focus in on the skills and the knowledge and the dispositions, the mindset involved in inquiry. So we started off really simply with honing in on just simply to listen, to be present and to listen, to think. And obviously when you're listening, you're making notes and documenting, and then you're thinking, and then you're talking. So, and questioning as well. So we sort of just basically, it was just listen, think, question, talk. And and then after that, after a couple of years, we elaborated on that and looked more at collaboration and documentation, and also about the importance of a really good, hearty inquiry question that that's based in your, you know, in the core fundamentals of or concepts related to your philosophy. And so yeah, and then after one of the key moments that we also had a shift was I went with Julianne to Reggio Emilia, and while we were there, we got the idea of coming back and engaging in a centre-wide inquiry around the concept of aroha, which was something that was dear to us at Kids Domain. It's something that people describe feeling this wairua in our centre, and we wanted to understand, you know, how we perceived that and could see that in our centre. So each centre embarked on their own inquiry. They generated their own question around this concept of aroha, and then we have an annual conference every year. We came together at that conference and we shared the learning that we'd engaged in with the children over that period of that time, and it was amazing. We came up with 3 distinct different stories, but with synergy, if you like, almost between them all, and it generated this wonderful new understanding around aroha for us. We also were looking at the process and the content of inquiry quite separately. We would, like I say, looking at the skills and the knowledge involved in actually enacting inquiry. And then, of course, there was something like aroha. There's the content of the inquiry, what we're actually inquiring into with the children. And we would try and keep those, they're obviously closely interrelated, but we kind of separated them out, teased them out a little bit to be able to really build those initial skills of inquiry. So yeah, that in
Okay.
that point.
Thank you, Bridget. And Shirlene, can you speak a little bit to the process that your centre's been through, I suppose, in embedding this culture of inquiry, and maybe sort of how it's evolved over time from the starting point that,
Yeah, I think like as Bridget mentioned, we're going back 15 years. Like, it's actually hard to believe it's 15 years that we sort of started this journey. And then maybe 10 years ago, less than 10 years ago, when we first got into that exploring the concept of aroha as an inquiry. And that was across the whole centre, which we're talking around 30 staff maybe in those inquiries. And so that was the whole idea behind that, was to develop our skills and knowledge and understanding around it. And back then it was pretty much led and facilitated by Bridget and myself. While we were doing that, we were also then mentoring our head teachers in those skills to be able to carry them out. We're sort of with their own teams. And so in order to do that, then they then went on to do their own team inquiries. And we sort of backed away a little bit, and our head teachers sort of took on that role of facilitating inquiries within their own team. And Bridget and our role was then to mentor those head teachers in those. So, and after each year, sort of each inquiry, we'd get together and we'd sort of reflect on the year and our learning through that, and then sort of come up with what else might we need to add to this, going forward. And, what are some of the things that might be teachers might still need to encourage. And alongside that, we were always mindful of that culture of safety, having that safe space. So when we talk around collaboration and listening and things like that, what does that actually mean and look like and feel like in our teams? They're more than just words. So it was really important, I think, to make sure that we weren't using these words and on the understanding that we all knew what they meant or what they looked like. Within your teams, we had to, I suppose, inquire around what does collaboration look like for us? What does it, and you start to see things where you might be in a meeting and you feel it, you think you're collaborating, but you might also have those people that are sitting there sort of agreeing, but not necessarily knowing what they're agreeing to. And so I think it became important for us to recognise those things within the team and, find other ways to work with those teachers on, to try and understand or connect to the inquiry that's going on within the room. So alongside these inquiries that were happening, we were sort of building capacity, I suppose, within the team. So there, as Bridget and I stepped back and the head teachers became more the leaders and the facilitators within the inquiries, they also then started to recognise leadership within their own team, within their teachers, and and recognising that the positional leaders aren't necessarily always the ones that are the experts. And so I think we really then made a conscious decision to tap into individual teachers' strengths and talents and allow that to come forward. There was a lot. So I think over the years, we've trialled many ways. But what we're learning is that it actually takes the pressure off the leader. The more that you are able to bring these skills or strengths and talents into the team and let those people fly, it's actually freeing for you, and you can become, that within that tuakana-taina relationship, you're no longer expected to be the tuakana or the expert. You're growing that within your teams. So I think different things that we noticed over the years was that these teachers, although they were showing, they've got these talents and their strengths, doesn't necessarily mean they have the skills to facilitate the learning of their peers. Or so therefore, that's where we might step in and help that growth within them. They've got the content or they've got the passion, but they still needed support in other ways. So over the years, we've looked at within inquiries, teachers' skills and peer mentoring, becoming leaderful. So that's something that we're sort of exploring at the moment, what leaderfulness looks like within our centre, within our teams, within each other. So there's a lot more to, I suppose, creating that culture. And also, I think we never arrive because we're always, our thinking changes, we're learning, we're growing. What we said last year doesn't necessarily mean we have to hold on to that this year, because we've been open to listening to different perspectives and new perspectives from each other, I think, and that's been the most beneficial, I think, for us, is that within our own group of 30 people, we've all been able to teach and learn from one another, and that's that concept of ako.
Okay, well, I know we're going to go through an example of an inquiry tonight, so I just want to invite people listening, if they questions are coming up for them as they're listening, please type them into the chat function. So yeah, can you share with us an example of an inquiry that has been explored in your centre?
Sure, absolutely. So this is a brief overview of a really complex inquiry that spanned about 18 months in one of the older children's rooms. And I'm just letting you know before we start that I've got permission to share the images. And it really began with the radical intention to rethink or to reconceptualise, if you like, our documentation and assessment practices. And the reason for this was because, as part of our collaborative inquiry approach, we were seeing that pedagogical documentation is really a living, dynamic process, and rather than a product. And it not only assesses and communicates learning, it generates it, it activates it. We see it as very much an alive part of the learning process. It emerges from our community and it helps shape our community. So it's therefore really intentionally relational. It's kind of like a connective tissue within our ecological system. So why then, we asked ourselves at the time, were we going out of the room alone on non-contact time and writing a story about an individual child, often about an individual happening that would go into an individual portfolio. It kind of just didn't make sense. It didn't seem to align to our values. And so we wanted to know, how could we disrupt this? How could we shift our habitual gaze on the individual, if you like, to something else, to something that's broader and wider. So we underwent a project to completely flip this around, to see what happened and what new practice might be generated. You know, how could we be innovative and try and discover something new if we focus on collective interrelational learning experiences before we then start to talk about the individual. So we agreed quite radically to stop writing individual stories for a time and to only write about the group, to try and only write about the collective happenings, the interactions and the connections that were happening in between the children and materials, between the children, materials and the space and the teachers. And of course we put this, as we were doing it, to the wider community as well, so that they were aware of what we were doing. And of course, this was a huge step, and it was really hard. And so to help, some of the teachers are actually, it's amazing how ingrained this is, because some of the teachers were really struggling to actually, to know where to even start to write a story about a group where you're actually not focusing in on an individual, or you're looking at what's happening in between the children, or in between the children and the materials. It mightn't necessarily be more than one child. It might be a child in a space with material and something happening, but to be able to see how one was affecting the other. So to try and do this, the teachers thought what they would do is that they would focus intentionally on setting the conditions for collective or collaborative learning, if you like, so that they could more easily recognise it and be able to tune into it and be able to then document and share it. And at this time, as is always often the genesis of an inquiry, there's often a convergence of many factors that give rise to it. And at the same time, we'd recently been flooded, and we were having some new flooring and some new furniture, and a new design space was being set up. So to begin with, the teachers, why is that not going? Here we go. So to begin with, the teachers had watched what was happening in this design space, and they saw that the children were making structures or buildings that they were joining together to make cities. And they really they noticed that there was a strong desire to connect or to collaborate with others. And we also at the same time saw that there was an exhibition on at the Auckland Art Gallery, and we have an ongoing relationship with the Auckland Art Gallery, and so we always got an eye on what's happening. And we saw that that there was an exhibition that was on that really connected to the ethos of this inquiry and what we were seeing here with the children emerging. It was a participatory exhibition called From Pillars to Post, Project Another Country, by artists Isabel and Alfredo Quilazan. And what they were doing was they were using recycled cardboard boxes and paper tape and offering those and inviting people to come in and to make small cardboard houses to create a model city that they were then going to make into a larger installation later. The purpose of the installation, they said, was to explore community and family and relocation and homemaking, particularly in a global society in which we live, where people are constantly moving around and cultures are merging, and what that means in people's conception of home. And so we visited this exhibition, and it fed into the inquiry beautifully. It really opened our eyes to the affordances of materials, simple materials such as just card and tape, and their ability to ignite thinking and dialogue with the children about home and what mattered to them and how they perceived this notion of home. And it was perfect for seeing the productive collaboration that happened between them. And it seemed to, it really highlighted for the teachers the aesthetics, if you like, on relationships and difference and connections and identity. And what was really interesting was that there was a very curatorial aspect to the exhibition. You as a participant had to decide where you were going to place your home. And that was really interesting, how deeply the children considered where their home belonged. They took a lot of time to sort of like figure out the perfect place for where it would fit into the surroundings and vice versa. And so in response to that, from back in our design area, we set it up with recycled card and reposed the question of, what does home mean to you? And the teachers observed and listened really carefully, and they could see those rich interactions and dialogue between the children as they were becoming familiar with the materials. That's a beautiful picture. I love that image. It's real tuakana happening in that one. And later they would, and not only that, but it was like their hands and their minds were working together. You can see these girls here were collaborating on one piece. And it was amazing to see their ideas merging and their theories. And the children would keep coming back to revisit their homes and to weave stories around them and to share them with one another. And rather than write individual learning stories, what the teachers did was experiment with sharing narratives about what they were noticing within the groups by putting them into these stories. And they did it in all sorts of different ways, telling stories about groups of children and how they were coming together or working alongside each other. So they were stepping through just with what they were noticing and then putting them back out to the children to look through, so that they could relaunch their ideas and elaborate on them. They also put images up of the art gallery and the children working with the materials along with provocational questions up on the wall. Some of the images were taken by the children themselves and put up by them. They compiled their own visual diary along with help from the teachers as well. And they put their own descriptions and their own words alongside the images, either themselves or with help from the teachers. And all of this was recasting these experiences back at the children, so that documentation was very much a living part of this inquiry process. And this didn't just stop with the children. Making homes extended to the whole community. The teachers created their own in a team meeting. We often will, always, normally when we're putting out materials for the children, we'll experiment with them ourselves first, and particularly around concepts like this. And that was actually quite a special occasion. The teachers really put a lot of thought into it and shared stories about what home meant to them and about their childhood and what they missed and what have you. It was a lovely experience. And it also went out to the parents. They sent home bags of materials for the families and invited them to capture what home meant to them. And this, of course, might not be a literal interpretation of what home is right now, but more a composition to express reality, imagination, and also memory, and the desire of what home could be. And this was, like I say, a wonderful opportunity for families and our wider whānau to really express what matters to them and to share that and to be involved in the life of the inquiry. There was a great response that crossed borders, across time, across cultures, and across generations. There were whole families, whole extended whānau who participated in building and creating these homes. And then they were brought back to the centre and shared with the children, and that provided really rich opportunities for the children to see multiple different homes and different interpretations, and to compare them to their own experiences and their own perceptions, and to see similarities and differences, and then to open their mind to all the different possibilities. And it certainly sparked new ideas, and the children sometimes would then go and revisit their homes or remake a home and add something that they would really like from somebody else's home and make it part of theirs. And all of these homes, again, just like at the art gallery, were curated into a model city. And again, they had to decide where their home belonged, and that was something that took a lot of consideration. Placement of your home was really important, and if you wanted to come and put yours somewhere else and move someone else's, then you'd have to negotiate that, because you had to think about how it affected somebody else's home and how it affected the whole aesthetic as well. So that was a really interesting process to be part of as well. And after a period of months, we went back to the gallery again to see what the installation the artist had created. And you can see it here in this image. And we also had another go at creating homes. And you'll see in this image here that we noticed that the children this time when we visited were actually engaging with the card quite differently because of what they've been experiencing back at the centre. They were collaborating a lot more and making houses together. And at times they were doing this almost intuitively with very little conversation. These two girls hardly spoke, and it was like they knew what they were wanting to create. And you can see here that that one of them is actually taking the tape off another one but she's actually looking actually at the cardboard home. And that was really amazing to see, and really heartwarming to see how their collaborative processes were developing. And then back at the centre, when we got back again, we obviously regard the children as researchers alongside us. So as we were going through the process as researchers, as teachers, we were also doing those same processes along with the children. So they were taking images, producing images, we were putting the images in different forms around and with provocational questions, and then they would get together to interpret those, discuss them, think together, and analyse them. And it was actually the children who told us what their interpretation was. We'd been struggling to figure out what this might mean and what they were. And of course, once the children told us, we sort of course they are. They're inverted sailboats. It became very clearly obvious. It was amazing that they could see that before we could as adults. And as part of the inquiry, we helped the children to write to the artists, to ask questions and to share their work. And from this exchange, we learned from the artists that these inverted sailboats symbolise journeys and travel and movement associated with migration and the change and of the merging of communities. And the idea of movement was actually something that we had seen regularly come out and emerge from the children's theory making throughout the inquiry. And anything that moved was a popular addition to your home that you saw in somebody else's. And when we invited the children to make an installation out of the homes that they had made, we were not surprised that their ideas echoed the artists. The children decided that what they wanted to make was a swing for everybody in the whole wide world. And this blew us away. It really, to us, encapsulated the values that we were trying to live, and with the compass for our inquiry. That was a magical moment for us. And the swing, they then designed the swing both through drawing, and they curated it and put it together as well. And again, as they were curating the actual making of the swing, it became very important about where homes belonged. And there were also very many logistical issues and problems to be overcome as part of the making of the swing. And we saw ourselves as teachers as what we refer to as Matisse's assistant. And we learnt this saying at the International Arts Conference in Wellington about 2 or 3 years ago, is that as teachers, you can actually, the children are the artists and the architects, if you like, but we can follow their lead. We can assist them to bring to fruition the image that they have in their mind. So we saw ourselves very much as those helpers. And so to sum up this experience, I have gone and given you a once over lightly. Really, this experience really did create the conditions for collective learning experiences, and for the teachers to be able to tune into them and to experiment with how to make the children's thinking and their own thinking and theory making visible. And in the words of the artists that they wrote to us, the main idea of all our work is the coming together and the building of narratives of different and numerous individuals who have come and taken part in the making. And in this process, we demystify the very idea of art solely as an individual pursuit. Our process is very important in the creation of our work. The actual artwork becomes a documentation of what has transpired in the creation of the work itself. And we feel we couldn't have said those words better to describe our inquiry and the learning that took place in it. And our installation still hangs in the centre. I took this image this afternoon. It's a trace of the history and a reminder of the collective nature of our learning and becoming. And as I said, through the inquiry, the teachers discovered, innovated new ways to document and assess children's learning, ways with a far broader optical perspective than before. And when we've had checkpoints through the inquiry to say, how's that going? And don't get me wrong, there were certainly very many challenges as part of this inquiry as we navigated it together. You know, and we at times we felt like we were in a pit where where things got really hard, and we'd have to help each other because we were all at different paces and at different times figuring out how we were going to approach something. You know, some of us would be feeling like we'd just launched ourselves off the cliff and were sort of heading towards the bottom of the pit, or had come out the other side. So we were helping each other through that process. And after many months of challenges and beautiful moments, we really imposed the teachers, you know, would you go back to how you were doing things before? They all very firmly agreed, absolutely not. There was a new pathway forward now, and that still resonates, of course, today. So that's an example, if you like, that really encapsulates and embodies the premise that underpins a lot of it, well, a culture of inquiry and an inquiry approach to learning. The why we do that is to actually get to moments like these. And but another thing to point out too, this is after many years of learning the basics first. I think, you know, this is after, this is 2018, 2019, you know, we kicked off many years prior to that. So we're always learning and becoming. So
thank you, Bridget. It's beautiful images. Thank you so much for sharing. Just a couple of questions that I want to try and squeeze in tonight. What do parents think when you sort of change the focus from the individual learning story to looking at the group and the collective? I don't know, Shirlene or Bridget, who would like to speak to that question just briefly?
Yeah, I can add to that. It didn't just happen. You know, we didn't just take everything away and then their child wasn't visible any longer. It was something that was clearly visible, made visible about our intentions and our documentation leading up to it. You know, we're talking about relationships, and we really do believe in how they learn with and alongside each other. And but what we probably weren't doing was showing how that was happening, because we were focusing on the individual. And so we started to share, I think, just in our general daily pages, or focusing more on the benefits or the learning that does happen alongside their peers or with their teachers, and showing also how their child, that individual child, is actually supporting the learning of their peers. So I think it was gradual but intentional, that we wanted to show that we weren't discarding the individual and their learner. We wanted to show them, I suppose, within the whānau and their part that they play within the whānau. I mean, Bridget could add to that.
I can, all I say would add to that was that we were making sure that we were keeping in touch, obviously making visible the inquiry and what we were doing and making that visible. We were finding new ways and different ways of still telling the story, but just in a different way. And then honing in on the individual after a period of time. It just wasn't our immediate go-to. So you might, after a period of time, tell a richer, deeper story about that individual, maybe after about 2 or 3 months, but that you'd see them as part of the bigger picture over that time frame. But then after that, you might tell a really, you know, what we'd call a meaty story about them that would talk to that learning and their engagement over that period of time.
And that would be presumably deeply satisfying to families, and they'd understand, you know, how this was all coming together, and I think builds that community, I suppose, knowing what everybody's doing rather than just seeing, you know, that individual focus on your child.
I think what happens there too is that the families start to appreciate actually the environment that their children are in, and the learning that is happening, even if it's not necessarily the focus is on their child as an individual. They can see the environment that they are in and how much they can be gaining by being in amongst that. Yeah, so it's not necessarily, and going back on that as well, I think, like Bridget said, to get to that point, we had been through all of that as teachers ourselves. And so we had started to learn what it looks like to be a part of a community and how us as individuals contribute to that community. So I think by experiencing that, made it easier for us to see it within the children as well, and then be able to articulate that or document it in meaningful ways that we actually had been through ourselves.
Makes a lot of sense, thank you. Shirlene, I'm going to be really unfair on you. I know that you work with the infants and toddler teachers quite a bit in the centre, and we have questions about, you know, how this might look for infants and toddlers, doing inquiry with infants and toddlers, but I can really only give you a couple of minutes. You know, what can you offer? We're quite happy to follow up tonight's webinar with another one with the teachers, aren't we, from your centre? So this is something we can look at in a follow-up webinar. But yeah, I just wondered if there was something you could share with us about how this might look with infants and toddlers.
Yeah, I think that's a fair enough question, because we're exactly the same when we were seeing all these amazing things, even within our own space. Like, we'd look at the preschool room and think, oh my goodness, you know, how do we do that with our children? And you know, I think it felt like the children aren't talking to us, and so they're not able to give us their voice or their perspective. But actually, we just had to listen differently, I think. And so it meant that we didn't have to try and be knowing everything that they were doing or thinking. We had to find ways to share and to be able to make it visible without putting our, I suppose, adult thinking or perspective onto it too much. So if anything, it probably meant stepping back as teachers and really listening, and we had to fine-tune our observation skills and talk amongst ourselves more around what we think might be going on. So it took a lot of, it still takes a lot of work, but also re-look at our actual image of that infant and toddler as being just as capable and competent. They are, we know they are, but we felt like we had to always be proving that. Whereas if you step back from that, the children are showing it themselves. It was about us having to change the way that we were looking into that. It happens, it's actually just as exciting, and we have got some inquiries that have been amazing, transforming in teachers, the way that we look and see our babies, infants and toddlers.
Thank you. We'll have to make sure that we can include some of this in our follow-up webinar with your team. Okay, well, we must come to an end. It seems to have just rushed past. Thank you so much for all you've shared. Just to conclude then tonight, what advice would you offer teachers who want to try out a culture of inquiry in their own setting?
I would just say, give it a go. Be that person who throws the stone into the pond. Be bold, be brave, be courageous, be tenacious. And I'd also say just take it simply, take it one step at a time, find a friend, find someone that you can actually do something, especially in early childhood, we work with other people, bounce ideas off, get passionate about something with, and see if you can get support from, the organisation that you're working within or the community. If you try something new and you have those beautiful moments that are magical, when you can see that magic of wonder in a child's eye, when they can see you wondering, when they can actually see you inquiring and that you're actually part of it. You know, that moment when you look at a child and you think, oh, that's magic, they're doing the same back to you. And so if you have that moment, share it. And that will, you know, it'll start generating a momentum. And then I say, be tenacious and keep that going.
Thank you, Bridget. Anything you'd like to add, Shirlene?
Yeah, so definitely all of that, but also the importance of awhi one another. Look, support one another. And when you're in those moments of not knowing, share that. Be honest, be vulnerable, because actually that when you get that deep, that's where I think the magic comes from, because the excitement comes from. And what you might think has been something that you're wondering about or confused about, it's not until you actually share that you actually realize that, wow, they've been thinking that too, or they're thinking about it in different ways. I think that's the excitement, is that no matter what it is that you are curious about, somebody else will be just as curious as well. And so I think that's where the joy or the excitement of it all comes from.
Thank you so much. So much gratitude coming through on the chat comments for sharing the work that you're doing. And as I said before, the recording of this webinar will be up on our website in a couple of days. So maybe it's even something that you know, teams can look at together and see if they can generate some questions about their current practice. So you know, do share with your colleagues the work that Shirlene and Bridget have been doing at Kids Domain, and look out for another webinar coming up perhaps in November with the teaching teams from Kids Domain who can talk to us a bit further about what they've been doing. So many thanks again. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Shirlene.
Thank you.
Good night all.
Ko Mārie.
Ko Mārie.